Chapter 43 Cadence Lee as Huga Puff. So what are my options for juvenile evolutions anyway? I asked, having realized that just following Ilma's advice, as well-meaning as I believed it to be, might not be the best idea. Presuming only a single horizontal evolution beforehand in the young stage. I was, currently, sprawled out on the roof of the Inn's Ravan. Chow Earl, Tamling and Colin were handling a quest inside of town. In what was certainly the most egregious oversight ever to occur in any world, the buildings in the town weren't built wyvern-sized, and so I was sunning myself while I waited for my teammates to handle the quest. I was joined by Ilma and Ray because Ilma was about as subtle as lighting someone's hair on fire and Ray stood out in the purely human population. We were talking about monsters and evolutions, and I decided to ask about my own. I had been swept up before, but really this requires more thought. Oh, there are quite a few, Ilma answered. If you choose one of the three basic elements for your horizontal young evolution, you have a ton of options. Although I do think the lake wyvern evolution is far better than the others. I agree with Ilma, Ray spoke up from where she lay with her eyes closed, enjoying the warm sun despite the cool air. Plus, the lake wyvern requirements were pretty easy to meet, whereas a lot of the others would require a bunch of work. I'm not really arguing about whether it is the best choice, but I am curious on what my other choices are. I do admit that I suspected that they were hiding something from me, but Ray just started giggling when she felt it through the bond, so I don't think it was that much of an issue. I mean, I can guess what you mean by an elemental evolution, but I am still just guessing. It is pretty self-explanatory, Ilma agreed. An elemental evolution is simply an evolution associated with one of the primary mana elements, fire, water, air, and earth. So you, as a gale wyvern, are associated with air, and a lake wyvern would be associated with water. And presumably an ocean wyvern would also be associated with water? If they existed, yes. Ilma nodded before explaining that strictly speaking there were no ocean wyverns, but there were coastal wyverns and deep wyverns. Wouldn't a deep wyvern be stronger than a lake wyvern? I mean, deep sounds more powerful than lake to me. Admittedly, a deep wyvern would probably lose to a lake wyvern if they fought in the air, but that isn't really saying anything about their power but instead about their adaptation. Yes and no? Ray felt thoughtful, although she looked rather serene. Elves seem to be talented at meditation. It depends on what you mean by power. A deep wyvern has a more powerful hydrokinesis ability. Ilma pulled out the information we had purchased and was reviewing it. They have different racial hide abilities, but the key difference for you, and for us, is that the lake wyvern still has a talent for flight. Makes sense, I suppose. A deep wyvern, by the sounds of it, didn't exactly need to fly much. That said, a more powerful hydrokinesis did sound nice. More importantly, Ilma continued on as she read. Becoming a deep wyvern would have a significant impact on your juvenile evolutions. Options like the cloud wyvern would be off the table, which would prevent you from becoming a storm wyvern as an adult without taking another horizontal evolution somewhere. I distracted myself as I noticed that when I, presumably out of human habits, used as an interjection it sounded like I was growling. No, Cadence, stay on topic. What about the other elements? I have to admit I have a personal bias towards fire, Ilma unnecessarily admitted. I knew she was a pyromaniac, so that didn't surprise me at all. But becoming something like a blaze wyvern would be problematic anywhere near flammable objects. Unfortunately, I know from experience that pretty much everything burns if you try hard enough, so that would be very inconvenient for you. Blaze wyvern's hide can't hit high enough temperatures to set paper on fire, Ray noted. It would make riding you pretty dangerous for me. Ilma would have to pick up the Wyvern Rider class. Can you imagine? Ilma smiled and laughed, throwing fire down on our enemies from on high. It would be pretty amazing. What monster would be able to stop that? Of course, the only difference between Ilma's fire and Ray's arrows is that Ray doesn't cause collateral damage. It did sound fun though. Wait, was her pyromania contagious? It doesn't matter anyway, I liked Ray and I wouldn't throw her away so quickly. Pretty much all the fire element evolutions have the same problem. Ray smoothly ignored Ilma's slightly crazy smile. You would be able to control the temperature, but if you ever stopped paying attention it would rise again. And having Ilma for a rider would end up with the world burning to ash. I tried to imitate a sigh, with mixed results. So I suppose that really isn't an option. Hey. For the record, I can put out my own fires very easily. Ilma said in mock anger. I am better than those fire mages that let their fires burn uncontrollably. By mixing my understanding of curses with my fire magic I can put it out at will. Maybe I am looking at this the wrong way. I suddenly had an idea while I also ignored Ilma. Instead of looking at my next evolution, I should choose the best adult evolution and work backward from there. What is the strongest wyvern species? There isn't one. Ilma was serious again. Wyverns are so adaptable that you could say that there are many bests, because each species is adapted so well to living in one particular environment. Fair enough, that was the whole point of our discussion about the difference between the lake and deep wyverns earlier. If you want my advice, she continued, still quite seriously, you shouldn't worry so much about power. It took me a long time to realize that being the best doesn't necessarily mean being the strongest or having the most power, but that you have to do the best for your life. You can be better than others just by having fun with your job, considering how many people just unhappily plod through their own. Have you ever just considered not fighting? You still get experience over time, you don't actually have to adventure. I had considered that actually, but there were a couple of problems with it. First, society was designed with certain body types in mind. I couldn't, for example, pick up a job waitressing at a tavern because I didn't have hands to carry food nor a body that could weave through tables without smashing them. Opening a door without breaking it would be a challenge for me, and that was presuming that even if I could open it, I would also be able to fit through the door frame. So what could I do? Or, more practically, what could I do that someone with thumbs couldn't do better? Well, I could fly things from A to B, which would essentially reduce me down to a beast of burden. Staying with the party over the past few days, I have come to realize that I would never have been able to keep up my original idea of acting dumb. Sure, I can put on an embarrassing show to raise my acting skill, but to be treated like that all day, every day? No, it would simply be too degrading. With Ray and her party I can talk and act like a person, albeit one with a scattered mind. On the other hand, I did understand what she meant. If I close my eyes and think back to before all of this started, I was just a regular girl, wasn't I? But this is one of those things I should never think about, isn't it? Because as soon as I do, I remember just how badly I want to go home. Except, is Earth even my home anymore? If I could go back, it would only be to visit, because if I could I would go back to my son and my husband. I think that I am more Cadence than I am Hammer, though. I have to think that, because if I don't keep myself separate from the lives I lead I think I might just collapse. Hell, I can admit that half my erratic nature this life is probably partially caused by my desire not to dwell on anything too much. I am flighty and excitable and erratic because I want to be, need to be. Just thinking about all of this is making me feel. Why did Ray just poke my nose? I suppose she could feel my emotions through the bond, but why poke my nose? I am a biological death machine wielding magic and poison death, not a cute baby. I have my reasons, Ilma. I huff and settle down. And honestly, I can't say that I don't enjoy fighting to some degree. I hate getting hurt and I hate being in danger, but I absolutely love winning. That got a laugh from both Ray and Ilma. So, I try to get us back on topic. The strongest wyvern is? Again, it is really dependent on what you want to do. The storm wyvern is probably the one with the single most direct strength. Ilma idly held her hands out and let electricity spark between them. But controlling lightning is difficult even for dedicated lightning mages, and storm wyverns don't so much bother to control their attacks as just try to blast away everything in front of them. A smart adventurer will just jam a long iron pike into the ground and let it absorb most of the attack. A dumb one will show up in metal armor and get fried. There really isn't much point to an attack if I can't aim it, although I could see it pairing well with Ray's arrows. Her arrows would guide my lightning to the target, which would solve the main problem that a storm wyvern had. Admittedly, I would be somewhat dependent on Ray, but given what I had learned about elves it was unlikely that I would have to worry about her dying on me. It would, Ray agreed. But I think I prefer the fog or mist wyverns. Using your toxins with their abilities you would be practically unstoppable by most foes. Hyuka would also poison us though, Ilma pointed out. If she used her abilities to their fullest extent and managed to spread mist or fog throughout an entire battlefield, we would be in it too. She can control her toxins, so we can choose one that we can make an antidote for, Ray countered. Plus, it would make scouting incredibly easy and she would be nigh unkillable on top of that. Unkillable sounds good, I agree readily. Although why would a mist or fog wyvern be any more or less killable than the storm one? They are two of the more famous, or rather, infamous, species of wyvern because of their racial abilities, fog body and mist body. Ilma showed me the page, which I did my best to read. Seeing an explanation for those racial abilities, I could see why they were a preferred option. Fog body and mist body did essentially the same thing. If I had one of them, I could generate fog or mist from my body in addition to breathing it out. More importantly, my body would become partially intangible and damage I took would be split between my health and my mana. So many attacks would do less damage to me, especially if I saw them coming, and the damage I did take would be reduced. The third effect of the abilities was that my mana would drain to restore my lost health and my stamina would convert into mana as my mana dropped. This also worked in reverse for stamina. If my percentage of mana was higher than my percentage of stamina, mana would be drained to fill my stamina. The ability sounded amazing, but I wasn't as young as my body was. I could see the problems with it. The numbers were slightly different between the two, but somewhere between 15% and 25% of the damage I took would be taken from my mana instead, but my mana was significantly less than my health. My stamina would be drained to refill my mana, which looked nice on paper, until you realized that in any prolonged fight my stamina would drop far faster than it would have otherwise. Frankly, I wasn't sure I liked the look of any of those options, storm, mist, or fog. If I had to choose from those three, I think I would choose fog. It only redirected 15% of the damage I took to my mana, but I would need to explore my other options. Maybe there just wasn't a good option at all? Hard to say. I sighed, wishing I was good enough with air magic and aerokinesis to flip the pages like I would have with hands. Hopefully, I thought to myself, the boys are having an easier time than I am. Asterisk Kingdom of Fracas, the Grand Temple, 18 years ago asterisk. Charl Kanspov. In the beginning, there was nothing. Then, there was the first one. From beyond, the first one created a space in the great emptiness and stepped into it. Thus the first one created the void and the void consumed the emptiness insatiably. As the void grew, the first one drew from it its blood and from that blood created substance. And the void howled in pain, distracted from its feast. It turned upon substance and tried to return it to itself, to render all into void, but the first one held the void back and it could do nothing against the first one's might. Who is the first one? I asked my mom as I sat on her lap. I wanted to read, but I hated the wisdoms who taught in the temple's classrooms. I'd try to hide and avoid them, but they always caught me somehow, and then they always gave me even more work to do. Where did they come from? No one knows, Mom said with a smile. Perhaps only Lady La herself knows for certain, but she has never answered anyone who has asked. I thought I had memorized all the gods. I had been proud of that. There were a lot of gods and goddesses, so it had been hard work. But no one told me about the first one. That is because we don't worship them, no one does. They sound mean anyway, I announced. Void was scary, but stealing its blood was wrong. Mom just laughed and started reading again. The first one subdued the void and created a cage from substance to separate the void from the great emptiness. Then, The first one created another cage and separated what would become the world from the void. The void would claw at the walls between itself and the great emptiness, but its claws could not leave a mark, so it turned upon the cage within itself and found that it could scar it. However, it could not break it. While the void had raged at the loss of its food and its blood, the first one had shaped a being within and named that being Order. The first one touched Order's brow and granted Order the spark of life. While the void was a creature of instinct, a monster whose intelligence was born of its feasting on the great emptiness, Order was sapient and was free to choose. And so the first one asked Order, "Will you uphold creation?" And Order answered with the determination they were born with, "I will, and always." This pleased the first one, who connected Order to the cage that separated the world from the void. Order, dutiful to his task, spake thusly, "I am all that is, and I bend to nothing but my Creator and my own will. Order I am, and order there will be, for I was granted the power to make it so, and as I make it, it is." And so, Order created all of the laws of the world, and they were immutable and inviolable. That substance would call to substance. That substance could never be destroyed, nor created again. And that substance would obey the forces upon it by those who would be born upon the world it would be. Order was proud of his laws, yet in their youth they felt a hubris. Thus Order had spake, "The void shall never be able to break the bonds that separate it from this world." And thus it was, but while the void could not break the cage, it could rend it. And so Order always had to watch the border between the world and the void, lest the void whisper through the tears it made and convince a sapient to let it in. Order was kind of dumb. I wouldn't have messed up like that. Why didn't he just change it so that the void couldn't damage the cage? Order cannot change, Mom answered. They too are bound by their laws. But couldn't they just make a new law that makes them not bound? I was quite smug that I had managed to think of a better way than a god. Maybe Order would take my advice and I would become a high priest, or a god myself. Mom just laughed and started reading again. The Wisdoms had been furious that I didn't know this story already, but their voices made me fall asleep. I could never listen when they talked. Mom was different though. Order pleaded with the first one, but the first one would not help Order any more than they would help the void. Instead, the first one took another piece of substance and held it out to the void. The void was cunning, but a slave to its desires. It knew that something was wrong, but it could not ignore its hunger and bit into the substance. But as its fangs bit into its meal, it found that it couldn't retract them. The first one pulled the substance back and tore the fangs from the void's mouth, leaving it screaming behind them as it returned to the world. To this massive substance, laced with void, the first one granted the spark of life, but the first one had not shaped it. Chaos was born fighting the echoes of the void's hunger and the ghost of Order's bonds that lay upon its substance. Chaos was the first human and wielded the void's power with Order's strength, yet was never able to reach its full potential. Chaos turned to its creator and asked the first one, "You chained and abused my elders, what will you force on me, O Great One?" The first one merely laughed while shaping substance into the planet and the stars and all that was in the world. The first one was still laughing when they finished and returned to the beyond. The three fought among themselves, with Order and void always at odds with each other. Chaos, as was its nature, would help or hinder either Order or void according to its whims, always assuring that neither could ever truly win. Yet, it was bitter, because it knew why the first one had laughed at it. The first one had not needed to bind it in any way, because Chaos would do as the first one wanted without being bound. But Chaos was doing what it wanted, right? I didn't get it. If Chaos did what it wanted, why was it unhappy? If Mom wanted me to eat cookies, I wouldn't be unhappy to eat cookies. Chaos isn't chaos if it is following a plan. Mom turned the page. Just as Order cannot go against its own rules, Chaos can't go with any for long. It is against its nature to be bound by its own nature. I didn't get it. Chaos couldn't be chaos. But how would chaos not be chaos because it was chaos? It was confusing, so I ignored it. Chaos approached Order, and seduced it. From their coupling, the first gods were born. Order gave birth to a woman, for she was born fully grown, and the goddess spoke to her mother saying, "Mother, I will be, I am, LA," and thus was truth born. While her mother was blind to the movements and desires of the void and those born with the void's touch, LA was as much a daughter of chaos as she was of order, and she knew her father as she knew her mother, and so nothing in the world was hidden from her sight. Chaos gave birth to a man, born fully grown, and the god whispered to his mother saying, "Mother, I won't tell you who I am, but you know me well enough, for what I am is secrets, and I will hold yours in confidence," and thus was secrets born. While his mother was unable to fully restrain and escape her nature, he knew all that was kept hidden because he was the secrets themselves. He followed behind his mother, and lent her his subtlety. What else he does, perhaps only his sister knows. Wait, how can they both be mothers? A priestess of love had told me where babies came from, and while it seemed kind of weird and icky, I did know that there was supposed to be a mom and a dad to make a baby. Order, chaos, and void are neither in both male and female, Mom explained, making even less sense than when she talked about chaos before. Why did all of this have to be so confusing? She noticed that I had stopped paying attention to her explanation and ruffled my hair, which I hated. To simplify it, order is truth's mother and secret's father, while chaos is secret's mother and truth's father. That didn't seem simple at all. The fighting continued, but now order and chaos were accompanied by their children. The brother and sister met on the battlefield, and while their parents both hated and loved each other, the siblings held no compassion for each other. Their power nearly rivaled their parents', and their fighting shook the ground and split the sky, and all that lived on the young world hid in terror and pleaded with the three to stop the siblings before they tore apart the world itself. Chaos refused, unwilling to hurt its children even though LA fought for order, but order's nature moved him to action. The world was their duty and purpose, and they could no more let their children break it than they could let void do so. Yet when they tried to stop LA from fighting her brother, they found himself powerless before her. Order was, by their very nature, bound to their actions. Everything they attempted, LA knew ahead of time and was ready for. Order, for all of their power, could bring none of it against their daughter, and the fighting continued and the world suffered. LA saw the young mortal beings, mostly ignored by the others, and saw their potential. She spoke the truth to them, granting them knowledge and power just below her own. Even with her mother no longer fighting with her, truth was unstoppable with her army of mortals armed with the knowledge of the gods. The mortals were bound by nothing, and used their power to conquer and dominate all beneath the gods. The evil they perpetrated is unspeakable, hidden from history by the god of secrets, lest horror overwhelm any who learn of it. Order, in desperation, turned to their eternal enemy and made a deal with the void itself. They coupled, and order gave birth to Scully's, god of justice. Scully saw his sister's actions and saw that it was wrong. He met with his sister and demanded she stop, but LA saw that he was weaker than her and ignored him. LA had inherited her mother's hubris, and while she could have looked deeper and seen the future, she did not. She thought that nothing could challenge her and that she deserved to rule the world and the void, and believed that void would be even easier to defeat than her mother. Both order and void were easy for truth to discern. It was her father and brothers that she had even the smallest difficulty reading. She could have known that she had a sister as well. She could have known that her two brothers and her sister would ambush her and her army. She could have defeated them if she had looked sooner, but she did not, and her hubris ended her ambition. Moria, the daughter of order and void, and the goddess of death joined Skillus and secrets in fighting LA. The mortal gods, confident that their numbers would overwhelm even a true goddess, attacked her. Moira spake to the charging mortals, "To be mortal is to die. No matter what you do, no matter what life you lead, you will meet me at the end of your days. Today, you have met me, and so your days must be ended." And they died, for death walked among them and no mortal could conquer her. Meanwhile, LA fought Skillus and secrets and was winning. She was truth, and truth always was. A mystery might obscure the truth, but no secret could change it. The truth could be judged, but no judgment could change it either, for the truth was. But justice was not his mother, nor was he his sister. Beyond truth was the laws set down by order, and the first one had not aided the young order in making them. Order made mistakes, and the world was cruel and unfair as a result, yet order could do nothing to change it. Order was even unable to ask chaos for aid. Justice was not his mother, and he invited his father to help because even law could be unjust. The God of Secrets obscured the plan from Ellie's cursory examination, and she was struck low by Void. And yet, she could not be taken by death. Moira held no power over Ellie, for the truth was. Void struck out again, yet Void could not halt Ellie either, and soon order arrived to push Void back from the world. Skillus could strike Ellie, but he was not powerful enough to stop her. It took Skillus and the God of Secrets working together to defeat her. It was then that Ellie was able to see past her hubris again and spake these words, "What will be, will be. What is inevitable, is inevitable. You know not what will come from this moment, but you could have never done anything different. Let it be known that even I could not avert the truth, although I did try." Those were the last words she would ever speak aloud, because before justice could be rendered, the God of Secrets moved and cut out Ellie's tongue. "You, that was icky. You." Mom sounded amused. "Of all your reactions, you choose you, Char?" The God of Secrets had to grab Ellie's tongue. He would have had to stick his hand in her mouth. "It is gross." And he cursed her in her weakness, that she might only speak the truth to justice and never again to mortals or gods again. And yet, justice floundered, because he then knew that his elder sister had moved out of a belief of necessity. Ellie, her mouth bloody, smiled and laughed and whispered the truth through the blood. No one save justice himself and truth herself knew what she whispered, nor what judgment was rendered unto her. Thus was the first war of the gods ended, and the gods turned towards the world ruined in their wrath. The gods were powerful, and yet the world cried out for more than they could give, and so the gods had children themselves. Justice fathered Eucus, the god of ambition, with chaos, and the people of the world were filled with the desire to improve it. Chaos also was the father to Mercy, who was the daughter of chaos and death. It would be Mercy that would blind justice, that justice may only act on what truth was told to him. But that is a story for another time, Mom said to me. For now, it is time for bed, Char. Wait, who is Yucas? That wasn't a name I remembered, and I had been so proud that I had remembered them all. Not all the gods are good to worship, Mom replied, but that wasn't an answer. You will understand more when you are older. Okay. I try to keep myself calm and pretend I took that for an answer as Mom tucks me into bed, but I know where I can go to check. I just have to keep myself awake for another couple of hours until my mother is asleep, and then I can sneak into the library myself. No one has ever caught me before, well, aside from the priests of LA, they always knew what I was doing. They never told anyone though, so it didn't really matter to me. I hated waiting for my mom to fall asleep though. It was hard not to fall asleep myself, and it was boring just sitting in bed and waiting for her to go to sleep. Hours later, I snuck through the halls of the temple and into the library. I wasn't seen by anyone that mattered, just a priestess of secrets and a priest of LA, and they either wouldn't or couldn't tell anybody else, so I was free to check the Book of the Gods. I had never directly read it before. The Wisdoms had given me a list of gods to memorize that was taken from this book, but I had never looked at it myself. It was on a shelf above my head and just barely in my reach. When I pulled it down, I found that it was very heavy too. I started to scan through it, looking for Euclid, and found that there were a lot of gods that the Wisdoms had left out. Decay, destruction, evolution. They did not seem like nice gods, but wasn't the purpose of the gods to uphold the world? Eventually, I found Euclid, the god of ambition, but his entry was empty save for a single sentence: if you could have any one thing, what would it be? I wasn't sure. There were a lot of things I wanted. Infinite cookies, to escape from the Wisdoms, to know who my father was. How would someone ever decide what one thing to take when offered everything? Oh, I would take everything, I whispered confidently. Everything is one thing, right? just like a cookie is made up of parts of a cookie. An excellent answer, child. A voice whispered behind me, and I dropped the book in surprise and whipped around to see. Nothing. Where are you? I was really afraid. There was no one nearby, yet I had heard someone speak to me. Who are you? An interesting question, the voice answered. It sounded like it was smiling. Considering what I am, asking where I am might be a singularly pointless question. The voice was inside my head? I didn't understand what it was saying though. Yes, I imagine you are a bit too young to understand the metaphysical implications of an entity actually being a concept. In fairness to you, Chow Earl, everyone else in your temple is too young as well. Humans are like mayflies. I kept looking around, but the voice really was coming from inside me and I was getting really scared. I was going to call out, even if it got me in trouble, but I couldn't. My mouth wouldn't open. I never was good with children. So many of them give up their dreams as they become adults. The voice seemed to mumble that before announcing, "Listen well, child, for I am Yucus, the god of ambition." I didn't notice that I had fallen to the floor for a while. I found my forehead against the ground, bleeding from a cut, and shakily pushed myself up. I wanted to cry, but I couldn't. I didn't think meeting a god would be like this, and I didn't like it. Truly, the dreams of children are more fragile than their lives, Ambition noted as he spoke to me. Yet I am not so easily swayed. You may have just barely met the requirements set forth by order to allow my interference, but you did meet them. You will serve my plan, and be rewarded for it, and perhaps it will fan the flames of your own ambition. You have met the requirements for the class. Initiate. You have 9 open class slots. You have classes available. Would you like to see them now? Yucus, God of Ambition, has assigned you the class. Initiate. You are now an Initiate. You have gained the skill, Prayer. You have gained the skill, Ambition is Life. You have 8 class slots remaining. Suddenly, I was alone in the temple library and I started to cry and kept crying until the wisdoms returned me to Mom. Asterisk Kingdom of Fracas, the Grand Temple, 9 years ago asterisk. It is easy, I suppose, to envy the gods. Easy to see their servants wield powers beyond mortal comprehension with seeming ease and want it for yourself. The few friends I had outside the temple thought as much and could never understand why I felt pity for them. But in the 9 years since I had been chosen by Yucus, I had gained a better understanding of what it really meant for them to be a concept as much as a being. As an initiate, I had been moved into classes meant for older children and I had struggled, but I did learn. I learned things that terrified me as a child. What child wouldn't get nightmares when they learned that the gods of their stories were very nearly mad? The very reason that they weren't insane was what was also driving them to it, and it was that their nature was absolute. We interchanged their names and domains because effectively there were no differences between the two. Yucus was ambition and ambition was Yucus. These were the thoughts that went through my head as I wrote my essay, taking the test to receive an acolyte's training. It was the subject I had chosen to write on, the inherent contradiction of my God, that even two ambitions that were mutually exclusive were both equally part of him, and that there could be as many ambitions as there were thinking beings. While I had originally been scared, and then angry, that Yucus had forced me to take him as my patron, I now knew that he could never have done otherwise. Order was given a choice at the very beginning, but no god ever had a real choice in their actions since. The most powerful could somewhat choose how they would arrive at a future point, but that they would arrive at that event was a foregone conclusion, and even in that choice they were severely limited. Ambition already knows that he will fail to break free of those shackles, and yet he must try. He already knows that I will not be able to further his plans, and yet he could do nothing but choose me as a pawn in a game he already lost. And so I pity him. Personally, I doubt I am any more free to choose than Yucus is, but there is a difference between that doubt and certain knowledge. Moreover, I am not bound to any absolute. If my life is already chosen for me, then that is something I could learn to live with. And most importantly, the way the human mind works, I am granted the illusion of choice even if there are none. I make my own decisions, or so I feel, but I don't need it to be true. It is that mere feeling, the emergent illusion of time and choice, that preserves me from the madness that naps at the heels of the gods themselves. Of course, I don't write down that I have come to share my god's ambition, although that is what the wisdoms assumed I would do anyway. Almost every true worshipper of Yukos agrees with their god's ultimate desire, because what ambition truly desires is choice itself. The pinnacle of ambition is met when they are granted the choice to choose everything, anything, or nothing and are not bound to choose any one of them. In short, Yukos wants freedom. After I hand my essay into the wisdom, I go to see my mother. It had only been a few years ago that I had learned the truth. Short of asking truth herself, I would never know who my father was. Mom was a priestess of life, and one of the requirements to become a priestess of life was to have a child. She had known nothing of my father, save what she learned of him as they spoke over a drink at a bar, and he probably did not know that I even existed. Yet this knowledge did not stop me from hugging her now, nor did it make me feel any less loved by her. That she had such a reason to have a child did not stop her from being a caring and loving mother, and I had come to appreciate the ambition she showed. Some of that appreciation was bleed over from Yukos himself, and it was one of the things I was most thankful to him for. To worship the gods was to be changed by them, affected by them. Each one influenced their priests in different ways, and the priests of Yukos were known for enjoying the vision of an action equal to or more than the substance of it. Without Yukos's influence, I think I would have been more hurt when I learned that to a certain extent I was something to check off a list. It had hurt though, even though she did love me. I had spent less time at the temple after that, preferring to explore the city itself when I had the time. Being able to feel the ambitions of people around me made it a fascinating experience. Inside the temple the ambitions of priests tended to be cold and quiet, but at the same time hard and unwavering. They knew their goals and pursued them with the patience of inevitability, for they had been granted surety by the gods themselves. But in the city, ambitions flared and faded, blazed and shifted. I could watch as the spark of an idea passed through the mind of a man, and they burned with desire and possibility, only for the flames to sputter out as reality reasserted itself over them. People were quick to have grand ambitions, and just as quick to give them up. It was last year that I, watching the ambitions of people around me rather than the people themselves, had wandered into a seedier part of the city. Thankfully, the robes of an initiate had kept me safe, mostly because anyone who saw them recognized that I would have nothing on me anyway. I had, unknowingly, tailed the lieutenant of a powerful gang into one of the underground bars they owned. Underground in this case because of their illegal fighting ring, drug sales, and prostitution. I had been confronted there, because my robes only kept me so safe, and they had no desire for the servants of justice to come down on them. I was still in somewhat of a trance however, and didn't reply to them. I watched the people around me until one of their thugs hauled me up by the collar. "And what?" the lieutenant snarled at me. "Is so interesting that you would ignore a knife to your throat?" "That woman," I said, pointing at one of the whores who worked here, "probably is wasted doing just that. You should offer her an opportunity to do something more." "What? Can't you see how much she wants something more?" I asked, hardly noticing the confused thug and gang underboss. "Can't you feel the strength of her desire? Given a chance, any chance, she would pour her soul into it." "Only one kind of priest talks like that," an older voice came from the back. "It has been a while since I have seen a worshipper of ambition, and a chosen one to boot." "Being chosen really isn't very impressive," I automatically replied. It sounded impressive, sure, but realistically anyone with a religious class had been chosen. The gods weren't often obvious about it, because their chosen usually found their way to the temple without much intervention. But the public was only interested in the flashy kinds of choosing and rarely paid attention to the usual ones. I had very nearly gotten a punch to the gut for saying that, if the crime lord hadn't stopped the thug, he would have given me a lesson in respect. Now, the criminal lord had said, "Leave the kid alone, he probably doesn't even know where he is and he might be useful to us." That had been last year, and I had agreed to help the criminals. Of course, I hardly saw it that way. I saw it as giving people who wanted something more the chance to do so. Was it wrong? A priest of justice might say so, but I didn't think the problem was me. As I had become more used to the chaos outside the temple, I realized that I had been distracted by the number of ambitions and how quickly they could change. As I spent more time around the citizens of the city of all classes, I realized that very few really had great ambition. In fact, most barely cared or thought about what they could be or do. The lords and ladies that I saw visiting the temples had ambition within their political games, but that was a petty thing. How many actually wanted to improve the land they governed or improve the lives of those under them? No. How many thought it was even possible? And I could see why they doubted, because the majority of the populace was perhaps not content, but definitely resigned to their fate. Few sought to level seriously, fewer still sought rare or special classes. They merely existed. And existed miserably. Hunger and disease were common in the slums, and the only source of levels and money to be found was in crime. How could justice blame them for wanting more? One level or one coin might be the difference between life and death when the next winter sweeps the weak from the world. Where was the justice in that? I started taking lessons at the underground bar, eventually earning the brawler class. My time in the city had made me come to believe that my God was right. The world needed a change. The world needed something more. Asterisk Kingdom of Fracas, Royal Palace, 2 years ago asterisk. I had come with the priestesses of truth and justice to the royal palace on a whim. I wished to see what the ambition of royalty looked like, but now I suspected that a priest or priestess of love had interfered somewhere, because I can only say that it was love at first sight. I had only thought that I had seen ambition burn before, but before this inferno I knew I had only seen the barest of sparks. I did say I would reward you, child. Yucus whispered into my mind, this meeting was your purpose, whether you make something more of it is up to you. You are to approach Ilma and work with her. Well, obviously I was going to approach her, although I could already see that I wasn't like her. I might be a servant of ambition itself, but she burned brighter than me. Perhaps she would have the courage to have spoken up, but I didn't, and I told myself it wasn't the right time. Instead I approached her after she returned to the temple with us and said, "Hello there Ilma, my God asked that I find you." As I held my hand out to her, before realizing I had forgotten to even introduce myself. Ah, how rude of me, I forgot to introduce myself. I am Charles Kent. Do you have a moment to hear about Lord Yucus, God of Ambition? Chapter 44 Cadence Lee as Hugo Puff. Our next mission was to escort some merchants to a city in the north, chosen so that Ray and I could meet with a proper leatherworker and get a harness, saddle, and maybe even some proper barding. I hadn't actually known what barding was until it was explained to me, but I was not about to turn down armor. Well, some very light and limited armor anyways. My best traits were my toxicity and my flight, both of which would be actively hindered by heavy armor that covered my entire body. However, some protection for my eyes, throat, and some of the more vulnerable parts of my legs would be nice. It was too bad that there probably wasn't any way to protect my wings, but that was just probably how it would be. We weren't alone on this escort mission either. There were several teams helping to guard the caravan, although we were getting better paid because our team had the advantage of a outrageously beautiful and smart, might I say, wyvern. Ray and I were able to provide extra security, which meant we were more valuable, which meant more money. And more money meant, well, not all that much, honestly. I suppose I needed enough money to get my barding, but as much as I had craved civilization while I was in the wild, I now had to come to terms with the fact that civilization was not designed with wyverns in mind. And civilization was especially unprepared for an intelligent wyvern that wanted to participate in it. As a rule of thumb, not that I had those, I could basically only go where you could take a horse, which really wasn't very many places. And that was only talking about the physicality of movement, the amount of places that you could both fit a horse into and that it would be socially acceptable for me to go was even less. It basically amounted to stables, And while that was better than my previous home, I still was sleeping in a stable. Plus, there was the thought that I didn't actually need to stay here. Sapients needed money because they needed to participate in the economy to live. A tailor can't build a house nor farm for food, but neither can a builder or a farmer make a warm coat for winter, so they all need to work together. I, on the other hand, could make my home basically anywhere, and I could always return to my little valley where I would be the apex predator. I felt a poke on the back of my neck. "Hey, what are you thinking so hard about, Hyuka?" Ray asked me as we soared over the landscape. I wasn't surprised she had noticed my introspection over our bond. "I just was wondering what the point of this all is," suddenly I replied. "Well, the point was points, but that was an overall goal. I will never actually be able to live in society, will I?" "Of course you will." To my surprise, Ray laughed. She noticed my confusion and explained her amusement. "Hyuka, both of us are young. You are practically a baby when we talk about your experience in this world." Well, that was technically true. But practically I did have a lot more experience than she knew about, and the more I thought about it, the more dubious I was that I could ever be accepted and find a way to live in society. Again, she could sense my skepticism, and again, she laughed. "Hyuka, try and imagine this. Imagine we work together for the next 1,000 years, or 5,000, or 10,000. What do you think people will think of us then?" "I don't know really. I suppose I have never really thought about it, or rather I presume I will be killed long before I live even 100 years, so thinking about events 10,000 years in the future was kind of pointless. Still, if I did live that long I would become incredibly strong. Too strong, perhaps. I think they would post a bounty on me and try to kill me," I answered. "I really can't imagine humanity living peacefully with a being so capable of killing them. Even if I was too strong to hunt down, who would want to interact with me? People would run as soon as they knew I was nearby." "If you were violent, definitely," Ray agreed. "However, if you become a famous adventurer, it is more likely that you will be viewed as a hero. There are other monsters that were viewed." "Did you see something, Ray?" I asked, scanning the ground ahead of us for whatever she had noticed. "I didn't see anything though." "Hyuka, turn back to the caravan," Ray replied. I couldn't see her, but I could feel her movements as she checked her quiver. "There is a flock of bronzebirds up ahead. We will need to coordinate with the other teams." "Bronzebirds? What, do they have metal wings?" I asked as I turned around, aiming for where I estimated the caravan would be by now. "How would they fly?" "Magic? They aren't completely made of metal. Just their beaks and parts of their feathers. Individually they are fairly weak and easy to kill. Don't underestimate them though. Their feathers are sharp and they can launch them pretty far. A flock of them can be very dangerous, especially to low-level adventurers without ranged options." "Huh. Well, they certainly seem unpleasant. I wonder if there are monsters that aren't terrible killing machines?" "Probably not. They would hardly be monstrous if they weren't, right? This world is much more hostile than my previous ones. They are pretty fast. Could you go a little faster?" "Actually, I had been thinking, I bet I could go a lot faster." Ray sounded, and felt, through the bond, a little bit nervous. Well, having seen a bunch of small birds bullying a crow before and now being a larger flying creature, I could see why it would be bad to be caught by the flock in the air. Ray, without my durable hide and without a saddle to hang on to while I maneuvered, was especially vulnerable. Well, I hadn't given too much thought to my aerokinesis before, but as any educated individual might, I did understand roughly how flight worked. Up until now, I had been using my aerokinesis in two ways. First, adjusting the speed of the airflow going over or under my wings to help me ascend or descend more quickly, and second, to part the air as I moved through it. It is the second one of those that was responsible for my speed in the air, because as I sped up, drag became a more and more difficult enemy to combat. In some ways, it was embarrassing, in that it took me this long to think of it, but I had an epiphany. I realized, in the conversation with Ilma, that the way I had been using aerokinesis had been lacking imagination. I had a magic ability that an aerospace engineer would kill for, and turned physics on its head. What if I could do more? I caught the air around me and pushed it forward, pulled it forward. I couldn't think of a good way to describe what I was doing. I used the ability and my mana to tether the air around me to my body, so that in a bubble around me the air would always be moving at the same speed and direction that I was going. What made it so exceptionally odd for me was that I didn't experience any drag when doing this. Instead, as I moved, the more air would be caught in the area around me and moved with me. This allowed me to move fast. I had never tested it over a very long distance before, but so far I wasn't actually sure how fast I could go doing this. It was a bit like rowing a boat down a stream instead of across a placid lake. Every time I flapped my wings, I added my speed to that of the streams, and then my ability made the stream go faster. So that perhaps the only limit to my speed was my mana. Well, that and, GODDDDSSS. Hyuga. Ray screamed as she clung to my back. You don't need to worry so much, Ray, I laughed back. No air resistance means nothing to pull you off me, right? We will be back at the caravan in a second. Well, a few minutes, but what is a little hyperbole between friends? Unfortunately, as impressive as my speed was, it had an unintended effect. Boom! I stopped maybe a few tens of meters above the caravan, but I had failed to account for the fact that I had essentially created a ball of compressed air around me. When I stopped and released my ability, all that air expanded at once. The wave of pressure shook the trees and even knocked a few people to the ground. That is pretty impressive actually, I spoke to Ray. Maybe I should have just charged those bronze birds. Ray swatted me on the back of the head in response and then asked me to go help round up the horses, considering I had scared more than a few of them off. For herself, she seemed happier than usual to be on the ground. Maybe I wouldn't try that again until she had a proper saddle, although I don't think the speed is particularly dangerous to her. Or perhaps I could modify what I was doing. If I could release some of the air as I moved, I could save mana and prevent the compression. Something for me to think about anyway. Passingly, I wondered if I wasn't taking this very seriously. Ray seemed worried by the flock, but while they would be unpleasant for Ray and I to fight alone and in the air, I didn't think they would be a problem with Ilma around. Between Ray's arrows and Ilma's owl, I figured that the biggest concern about the birds would be whether or not they were edible. Corralling the spooked horses was rather easy. Not that I calmed them down, but I was able to make them run back to the caravan. Maybe I would unlock a border collie evolution next? That would be funny. When I returned, I took care to land behind one of the wagons so that the horses couldn't see me. They probably could smell me, so I doubt my hiding would help much, but I tried at least. More importantly, I wanted to talk to my team about my upcoming fight. Bronzebirds. Rovan grimaced and groaned. Are they really that dangerous? I asked. They sound annoying but not particularly deadly to a group like us. They aren't too dangerous to us, seeking the horizon, specifically. Charl replied as Rovan continued to groan, but for the other teams and the merchants? Bronzebirds are a menace to teams without ranged and healing options. More importantly, our job is to protect the caravan. Our personal safety is not really the issue here, but whether or not we can keep our clients alive. As we were discussing, a rather angry-looking man wearing mixed leather and metal armor walked up to us. Oi, Rovan, the man growled. Keep a leash on your monster, mate. The fuck kind of shit was that? Mentally, I was about to label the man an asshole and add him to my internal, mate if possible list, before Ray elbowed me. Ah, yes, I had just detonated an air bomb above him, hadn't I? Whoops. Sorry about Hyuga. Ray stepped forward. I asked her to use her ability to bring us back to the caravan more quickly and I didn't anticipate that result. Oh, Ray. You don't have to take the blame for me. Although, since you offered, I won't stop you. I'm fine pretending that I am an absolutely innocent wyvern here. Shut up, sharp ear. The man snapped. I am talking to Rovan here. I hadn't heard it before, but I knew a slur when I saw it. Forget the mate if possible list, you're going on the will eat if possible list, buddy. Asterisk Kingdom of Wave, the southern frontier, 6 years ago asterisk. Carlin's puff. Well, this had gone to shit, and that meant that everything was going according to plan for me. Adventurers were attacking the shitty little clearing that the bandits I was running with had been calling a camp. The grunts were yelling and scrambling for their weapons, sometimes screaming when the acid mage struck them. Can't blame them for that part. It takes a peculiar kind of sadist to become an acid mage after all. The boss was trying to pull the group into some semblance of order. It wasn't hard to feign panic and approach him, after which a quick knife in the back with a poisoned blade put an end to that. I stepped over his body and into his tent, ignoring the scantily clad young woman quivering in its corner. Frankly, other than a vague sense of contempt towards the bandits who engaged in such activities, I didn't really care anymore. Besides, I had a time limit if I wanted to loot the place and get away clean. I started stuffing the late boss's stash of treasure into my pack, along with cloth to stop any jangling. I wish I had one of those bags of holding, but on the other hand those were pretty easy to detect. Getting away with the money was always more important than actually getting the money in the first place, so it was better to use mundane tools to avoid detection. I cut my way through the back of the tent, using my skills to slip into the shadows outside. It was harder with the heavy load I had, but with everyone distracted by the fighting I probably walked out without even trying. I did try though, because you never knew what you would get with adventurers, and it would be annoying to get caught. Not deadly, of course, because I was the one who had sold the bandits out in the first place, but I'd have to give up the items I was carrying. Normally, bandits rarely had things worth taking, but this was Southern Nova and that meant merchants transporting gold. It also meant that the powers that be were keenly interested in hunting bandits down. I'd known the score before I came down here. Blood flowed more freely than gold and Nova. Between the monsters, the Adventurers Guild, and Wave's military it was a death trap for the criminal classes. But they baited their rat trap with gold, and so a constant stream of fools were willing to try their luck. But luck had jack shit to do with it. I slipped out of the camp and into the forest, reflecting on the fact that the bandit class was shit. Unless you got a better one, like Marauder, you were basically fodder. A large enough group could intimidate a merchant and some D-rank party, maybe even a C-rank party if you had enough bodies, but at some point either a group of adventurers or a B-rank would show up and butcher everyone involved. It was far easier, and safer, to join the bandits, sell them out, and steal everything I could on the way out. If I was caught, well, the faces of the priests of Scully's when those LA fuckers told them I was actively stealing and fencing stolen goods and that it was all technically legal, was always worth a smile. I didn't go too far away from the camp. This was not a safe region in the slightest. Even with my skills I wasn't confident I could make it back to civilization. I was a thief, not a ranger. Fortunately, I just happened to know where a large group of adventurers were that I could let unwittingly clear the way back for me. I wish they would hurry up wiping my former comrades out. I would kill for a good drink after having to camp in the ass end of nowhere for so long. Actually, considering I'd be paying for my drink with the gold I've taken, I suppose I am killing for a good drink right now. Asterisk Kingdom of Wave, New City, 1 week later asterisk. Fuck. I groaned out as the dice came up Drake eyes. I wasn't the only one, as the audience watching the gambling table felt my loss vicariously. I had just lost more gold in one toss than most commoners earned in a couple of years. The lady on my lap was more than happy to comfort me. She had cost more than most of the watchers earned as well. Some might say that I would be better served not spending my money at gambling tables than on expensive courtesans. Although I would argue that anyone would experience a good courtesan's skills would end up admitting that that was hardly a waste, but no one ever got out of their game. A thief retire? That only happened in the stories. Fantasy stories. It wasn't only thieves, though. I thought as I waved the waitress over to top off my wine. Reality was that a soldier or an adventurer would never be able to retire unless they earned enough money to never have to work again in their life. Leave a life of fighting and danger and become a farmer. How would they compete with the much higher level farmers around them? Become an innkeeper? With what skills? Nah, I was in this ride for life, or at least until my life ended. It was better to risk it all and to live it up after rather than scratching at the dirt or whatever it was farmers did anyway. I'd spend my gold like water and then go out and earn it all over again. Asterisk Kingdom of Nwave, the southern frontier, 5 years ago asterisk. Find that damn thief. The bandit lord roared into the night, sending his lackeys scrambling. Over the past year I had been rather successful. Too much so in fact. There were few things worse for a thief than being known as one. I was not sure who had pointed me out to the boss of my current, former, crew and I was taken by surprise, but thankfully the bandit class was not one known for its intellect. Oi! I pointed to 2 random men who had heard the shouts, but obviously were not informed of who I was. Grab the torch and follow me. The bastard went that way. Of course the idiots actually followed me without bothering to confirm anything I said. Hell, they would have been idiots even if I wasn't lying to them. 3 bandits in the southern frontier might as well slit their own throats and save the monsters the trouble of killing them. Without a stealthy class you either move as a group or not at all here. Even having a stealthy class didn't really make it safe, but I wasn't going to have much of a choice tonight, and the next night, for that matter. It was going to be a pain in the ass making it back to civilization, and a pain to head north because clearly I was too well known here in the south now. That annoyed me enough that I was somewhat vindictive when I offed the bandits who came with me. Had to leave my knives in them though. It was not a good idea to keep bloody knives with me when I was traversing the forest. You never knew what kind of monster was wandering around or how good their senses were. For that matter, it was better not to have bloody knives in a city either. People tended to ask questions about things like that. My timing in this turned out to be impeccable, because there was another group of adventurers storming through the forest and into the bandit camp. Evidently, they had taken the commotion of my escape as a sign that the bandits had seen them and decided to attack now. However, this time they seemed to have a much tighter net of fighters for me to slip through. That was the problem with places like Nwave, and another reason that I couldn't stay here much longer. The gold lured people lured monsters and bandits, and those lured adventurers. That was fine for me at first, but now things were getting a little crowded, and I was getting that itch between my shoulder blades that always seemed to signal things were about to go from bad to worse. And it didn't seem to be going away as I was getting further from the camp. Even as the sounds of combat started to fade, my paranoia only increased. I didn't change what I was doing though. I didn't want to start running only to be caught out of stamina or to try and hide and be picked up by a search party. No, I was going to keep making my distance from the camp steadily. If I had a tail, they would surely turn back rather than go too deep into the forest. Or so I thought. But even an hour later that feeling had yet to leave me and my pursuer wasn't quite as skilled in stealth as I was. I had caught the occasional glimpse out of the corner of my eye of a small-bodied female through the trees. She had a bow, so perhaps she was some kind of hunter? Hopefully not a bounty hunter, although I don't think I have a bounty here in Nwave yet. I would rather not tangle with their kind though. If any class could squeeze blood from a stone it would be bounty hunters. This kept up for a little while until, "That is far enough," a melodic voice called out. I couldn't quite identify the accent. "If you don't stop, I will shoot." "No offense," I replied, "but I think I will just roll the dice on that." Hitting a moving target in a dense forest? A moving target that is actively attempting to dodge and that has my stats? And with my skills? Best of luck to you, little girl. I thought to myself, rather insincerely though. After all, even with my stats and skills I could still easily lose a gamble. Of course, the trick was to only bet anything that mattered on bets you couldn't lose. If I never gave my pursuer another chance to stop and draw their bow, Then I could easily go all in on this one chance, and as long as I don't get a fatal wound, I win. The soft thrum of a drawstring, the whiz of an arrow, and a pulling sensation on my upper left thigh was enough to put a smile on my face. I had been grazed, but it wouldn't hurt until my adrenaline ran its course. Hopefully, I wasn't bleeding too much, but I could hardly stop now to check. It was also good to know that the archer was aiming to capture, not to kill. Not that I would stop long enough to allow them a second show. Only a mix of my high luck, perception, and agility stats allowed me to dodge the next arrow. She was running and shooting at the same time. Fuck me, I grunted as I tried to keep the trees between myself and the shooter. This is why relying on luck is fucking stupid. So she either had a class, a skill, or high enough stats to allow her to move and shoot at the same time. Maybe some combination of all three. That would make this far more complicated, especially when a monster came sniffing around the blood trail I was leaving. Or when she decided to stop trying to capture me and started trying to kill me seriously. It might be time to fold instead. Alright. I put my hands up, showing that they are empty, although I could drop a knife from my sleeve easily enough. I'd kind of like to treat my wound, but now was not the right time for that. I didn't want to make her twitchy. I surrender. Don't shoot me, I'm not a bandit. My huntress emerged from the forest, seeming to quite literally step out of the leaves and shadows. A sure sign of the forest cloak skill, which would mean she was either a hunter or some class evolved from the hunter class. She was certainly dressed for the occasion, in a cloak dappled in different shades of green. Bandits always seem to say that when they are caught. Her musical accent made a lot more sense now that I saw her, or rather, saw her ears. An elf. Of course an elf would be able to shoot and move at the same time, although she must be a young one or she would have hit me the first time. We will see what a priestess of LA has to say about that. Oh, I don't mind that at all. I said with a smile, only slightly lying. Stealing from bandits wasn't illegal really. But things got a little less clear when I wasn't the one to sell the bandits out. I don't think that they would really be able to pin much on me though. Any chance I could bind this cut before we go on? It is really starting to hurt. As I started to relax and my adrenaline went away, I was finally starting to feel the cut on my leg. From experience I could tell it wasn't too deep, but you would never be able to tell that from all the blood soaking my pants. It was going to be a long walk back and it would feel even longer if the elf wouldn't let me clean it up. What, by the void, was an elf doing out here anyway? Asterisk Kingdom of Nwave, New City, 3 days later asterisk. This fucking bastard. I was glaring at the priest of Skelos who had delivered my sentence. That smug, smiling, little shit. Demanding that I give up my thief class. Just the stat loss alone would screw me over. How, by the void, was this supposed to be justice? No need to look at me like that, the man said after a minute of my stunned silence at his pronouncement. The gods assure me this will be good for you in the end. Fuck the gods and fuck you too. I let out a snarl, but the priest remained impassive. Arrogant bastard, he was half my age and treating me like a whining child, wasn't he? Of course he was. It wasn't like I had a fucking choice. I doubt this priest was powerful enough to actually strip my class himself, but the guards would hardly let me leave until I did. So my two options were either to give up my class and cripple myself or rot in the city's jail. I knew the prison of New's reputation as well, which meant I was aware that this was actually a choice between becoming a cripple or becoming a corpse. I had no doubt that the guards would accidentally forget I had been brought in and would accidentally forget to give me food or water. There was more than enough wiggle room between justice and law to fit my dead body. 15 minutes later, I stumbled out of the temple feeling like someone had dosed me with deep cave spider venom. My head was spinning, my vision blurred, and every bone and muscle in my body ached like I had been tossed down a flight of stairs after being beaten unconscious. I nearly fell over right there but was caught by a passerby. Whoa, the man helped me sit down. Are you alright? Before I could say anything, a familiar voice replied, Of course he isn't, Rovan. You heard what his sentence was. In fact, the only reason we are here is that you felt bad about it. Of course I do. The man, Rovan, became heated. What is wrong with stealing from bandits? This guy was the one to tip off the guilt to more than a few of those groups anyway, so you can hardly say he was doing more harm than good. How is that justice? The workings of the gods can be mysterious. Another male, younger, voice spoke up. I find it interesting that the priest said this will be better for you in the end, as it implies that justice paid enough attention to work out the full impact of the judgment. Skillus is not La, who is all-knowing by her nature. He must actually work at knowing more about a situation than La tells him, and most judgments are either too clear or too trivial to bother. Who are you people? I couldn't follow their discussion. In fact, I could barely focus my eyes enough to see a man in armor standing in front of me and that elf. Your name is Carlin, right? The man in armor, Rovan, who was very obviously an adventurer, and part of the same party as the elf who caught me, asked rhetorically, my name is Rovan, and I am the leader of an adventurer team. And, honestly, I kind of feel bad that this happened. Being forced to give up a class? That just isn't right, so I thought I would make you an offer. Kingdom of Nwave, New City, 2 months later. I had initially had some thoughts of revenge, but I quickly put those out of my mind. First and originally, because it was well known that killing an elf was difficult and that success was more often than not met with the killer being hunted down by some millennia-old elf that was a relative of the one that was killed. Secondly, however, I put it out of my mind because I grudgingly had come to like these kids, and that was really all I could think of them as, even though Ray was nearly 3 times my age. They were driven, flexible in how they approached problems, and more than willing to reach out and share a drink with anyone they met regardless of status or how closely they hewed to what the temple said was correct. Even Ilma, the bitchy midge girl, had another side to her, happily teaching magic to slum kids for free. She was still kind of a bitch, but she had more depth than I had first thought. The team, Seeking the Horizon, now that was a fanciful name, had been taking jobs in the city, helping me level my other classes, and I had been using my old contacts to help them complete jobs they normally wouldn't be able to. Which was how this had happened. You have met the requirements for the advanced class, Rogue. You have 7 open class slots. You have classes available. Would you like to see them now? Note, Rogue is an evolved class. You require a compatible class to evolve. Note, requirements have been met to allow class evolution based on the surrendered class, Thief. I think I might just stay with them for a while yet,